The key concepts that comes out from his own case and what he's written about it as well. First is called neuroplasticity. Now, for a long time, it was believed amongst neuroscientists that whatever brains you develop in the first few years of your life, you're kind of left with that. I mean, there's not much that you can change and do. That theory has been disproved now, and it's been proved that the human brain can form new connections. And that's how you develop your brain. So new connections can be formed throughout your life. You can tomorrow start off on, let's say, music or dance or something, and if you go very deep into it, you can develop new connections. Your brain will start getting very sharp in its sense of tune and things like that. So that is called neuroplasticity. Another thing that really comes out from this, I'm sorry, yeah.
Doesn't this kind of contradict your theory about choosing what you're good at? And I think, if you really love something, then you invest time in it. By virtue of neuroplasticity, can you not naturally with time become good at it?
It's a very good question. So, well, I mean, neuroplasticity will help you build those connections and so on. I'm a student of music, and I've seen how my own sense of sur and my own sense of pitch have become sharpened over the years through practice, through listening, etc. But again, it has its limits. I mean, I cannot become a basketballer. I'm not, Karl Malone was my favorite basketballer, and he used to look like a midget in the NBA, and he was 6 feet 1 inch. He used to look like a midget. So if I, try to become a basketballer, go there. So it has its limits. So can I become a painter? I don't think so. I mean, I can't paint to save my life. I can't sketch. I mean, if I sketch you and show you the sketch, you'll probably hit me, right? So, so it has its limits. But the point is that this gives you a note of optimism that whatever is the area that you love to do, you've decided you want to do, and you want to get deeper into it, there is, the Creator has given you enough to really work hard and make yourself better at it, right? Okay. So now, in the same book that I was telling you about, so one of the very interesting things that he says is that there was a psychologist named William James in the Harvard University, right? And in fact, very interesting anecdote about him is that when Swami Vivekananda went to the US, and he initially did not have any sort of letter of introduction or credentials or anything to participate in the World Parliament of Religion. So he just landed up there because some well-wishers in India wanted him to participate. He just landed up. He didn't have anything with him. So there were some initially some ladies in the US who sort of gave him food and listened to him speak, and then invited other people to listen to him speak and so on, which happened. So there was this lady who invited William James, who was a psychologist in Harvard, invited him to Swami Vivekananda's talk. So apparently at the end of the talk, Swami Vivekananda spoke to William James, and William James said, Swamiji, I mean, you definitely should go to the World Parliament of Religions. So Swamiji said, no, I don't have any letter of introduction, I don't have any credentials. So William James said, asking you for credentials is like asking the sun for its right to shine, right? It's an interesting anecdote about William James. So the same William James, he did a study about what constitutes your life and your sense of time and so on, and he came up with a very interesting theory that if your lifespan is a mental concept. I mean, time can pass fast or it can pass slow based on your mind, right? If you're doing something that you really like, it passes very fast. If you're doing something which is drudgery, very boring, it passes very slow. So it's a mental concept, right? So he says that the more events that you can pack into your lives, right? The more eventful you make your life, the more pegs you place in your timelines, right? When your mind looks back at your life, it is that much longer, right? So in terms of mental lifespan, you actually increase your mental lifespan by doing very diverse things, having an eventful life, which puts a lot of pegs in your timeline. So if you take the case of Benjamin Franklin, who was, he was everything from scientist to politician to statesman to everything else, right? I mean, one of the most accomplished men in history. So his timeline is packed with so many very eventful things. Now, many of us, the kind of careers that we lead, I mean, you enter, let's say, I don't know, software programming at 30 and you exit at 60, and pretty much, I mean, there aren't many eventful things happening, interesting things happening. So, I mean, those pegs are not placed in between. So if you're doing the same thing for 25 days, then you don't recollect any day as special, right? And if you don't recollect it, your mental lifespan is shortened, right? So what this book therefore says is that to lengthen your own lifespan, it's very important to expose yourselves to very different kind of things. So you remember things that you've done. You visit 100 places. You remember very diverse things. If you don't visit any place, you're sitting at home every day, then your memory is not going to record any special events, right? So do very diverse things. Have great exposure. That's how you lead a very long life and you increase your lifespan. So I can tell you that some of you in IIT will have a very long 4 years. Some others will have a very short 4 years. And it's in your hands to lengthen your 4 years at IIT by doing very diverse things, by getting deep into things, etc. Right? This is something that, again, a counterintuitive kind of thing, but it's my own personal observation that doing routine tasks is actually more difficult than doing challenging tasks. Because it's difficult to sustain doing routine tasks. It might be something that you can do easily, but it's difficult to just keep continuing with it. Challenging tasks are what actually, are more motivating, interesting for you to do. In fact, there was a study on what kind of tasks are most motivating for people. And the finding was that the most challenging kind of work is that work where you have 50% chance of success and 50% chance of failure. If it is 90% chance of failure, that is also demotivating. If it's just 10% chance of failure, it's so easy, that is also demotivating, right? So that is a sort of threshold which was found to be optimum, right? Which again, gives us this, sort of encouraging feeling that, going into entrepreneurship, trying new things. When I say entrepreneurship, doesn't have to be, outside. It doesn't have to be a company you start on your own, etc. It could be within an organization. You do what is called intrapreneurship, come out with new solutions, spearhead some new initiatives, etc. That's also fine. But doing things where you have a 50% chance of failure is actually a great idea. Okay, so most of you here will be engineers or managers. So, I mean, being an engineer, being a manager, I think it's just a question of what is your personal orientation. There is no, one size fits all kind of thing. It just depends on what kind of guy you are. I mean, like I said, I am somewhat a big picture kind of guy. I like to talk about things at a big picture, look at things at a macro level, right? But, I mean, it's just a question of what is your individual orientation. So some, very, very broad guidelines. I mean, none of them are 100% applicable here and 100% applicable there, but just to help you guys sort of differentiate between them and look at where you probably find your orientation. Engineering, a lot to do with the micro small picture, right? You design a particular mechanism, you design a crankshaft, you design a gear, you design whatever, a boiler, right? So a lot of it is to do with the micro small picture. Management, a lot with the macro or big picture. So what is the, energy sector going to look like in India 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Which are going to be the emerging areas? So if I am somebody who wants to operate in this sector, where should I make my investments, right? Look at the macro, big picture. So, I mean, it's just a question of individual orientation. Where do you sort of identify with, right? Engineering, a lot of working with equipments, devices, machines, etc. Management, a lot of it is working with humans, right? So again, it's a question of, which of these do you, see your calling, what do you enjoy, right? So I'll tell you the story of Lee Iacocca, a legendary, automobile sector executive from the US. So he says that, whenever I take an appraisal of people, there is one line in anybody's appraisal which is suicidal for me. I mean, if that line is there, I mean, that guy is a no-no for me in my company. And what is that line? The line which says that he cannot work with people. So he says that, I'm sorry, in the company we only have people. We don't have chimpanzees, we don't have gorillas. If you can't work with people, I'm sorry, you're off, right? So working with people is, I mean, it's for engineering, management, for everything it's there, but a lot more in management because you're external facing, you're facing clients, you're facing a lot of other kind of things externally. You might be facing regulators, government, etc. Whereas as an engineer, you might not, you might just be designing things, you might be coming out with new products, interacting with your own teams, right? Then looking at how an engineer will look at a technology and what is its utility, a manager will have to look at what is the functionality, what's the customer need that it can satisfy, and look at creative ways to take it out into the market. So do you guys know about Iridium, the company which made satellite phones? So the concept was that these would be satellite phones communicating directly with a satellite, right? So you don't need a cell phone tower anywhere near you, you don't need anything else. It would directly communicate with the satellite, and therefore across the world, even in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, you will be connected, right? You will be connected to this. The concept of satellite phones. They had 60 satellites to cover the whole earth, every inch of the earth, and they had a beautiful tagline for their advertisements: geography is history, right? Geography is history. Beautiful tagline, right? Now, they had this fantastic product, technology was great, utility was great, it was, you could cover yourself anywhere in the world, but it's a big failure. They had to pull down all their satellites. Why? Just because the handsets, the major reason, I mean, there were other reasons as well, but the handsets were too huge for people to carry around with them. So it was just not convenient, right? So that was a major reason. There were some other reasons as well. So a manager has to worry about these things. I mean, what is the functionality? Look at creative ways to make it useful, enhance the user experience, right? So if you look at German products, for instance, very well engineered, but they are not very user friendly. I mean, if you look at SAP as a package, right, not very user friendly. You look at American products, you look at Microsoft, Apple, very, very user friendly, right? So that's the difference between the two. Okay, and looking at specializations, a manager has to be a generalist. I mean, you have to be exposed in multiple areas, and you have to have a perspective of different things. You need to be a generalist. Now, what do I mean when I say that you need to be a generalist, and how do I try to do it? Now, all of you know the law of diminishing returns, right? So in economics, in various others, it's called the 80-20 rule also. So an 80-20 rule is a very, very pragmatic rule which is applicable in so many situations. So if you look at 80% of a company's business typically comes from 20% of customers, 80% of procurement typically from 20% of vendors. So what this law of diminishing returns says is that if you are looking for getting 100% perfect in something, right? So to reach 80%, right, you might take only 20% of the time, but every extra percentage towards perfection gets that much more difficult. So you end up spending 80% of the total time needed for perfection in that last mile of that last 20%, right? So that is the law of diminishing returns. So I would say that as a generalist, as somebody who's in management, my aim should be that I should be able to learn 80% of whatever I need to know in 20% of the time that it takes. And then I need to move to the next thing and learn 80% of that. So I need to diversify myself in many things, knowing 80% of each of them, right? Whereas for a specialist, it's the other way around. You put in all your time to knowing 100%, right? So diminishing returns or whatever, irrespective of that, I need to know 100% of things, right? Now, another thing that, as a manager, I often find is that, any work day of mine, not more than 1 or maximum 2 hours that I can do something uninterrupted. I mean, I keep getting phone calls, there's this team to manage, there's this issue to handle, this client, this product, right? So you need to do a lot of multitasking, right? Whereas in engineering, you can sort of, sit down, focused, uninterrupted, you're doing research on something, you're designing a product, you're insulated from, to some extent, from those, market issues and burning issues and so on. You're to some extent insulated from that, and you can pursue this. So again, it's a matter of what is your orientation. Do you want, you want uninterrupted, focused attention towards things, or you're okay with a lot of multitasking? If you're not okay with multitasking, probably management is not the right, game for you. Okay. Engineering decisions are based on data. When it's machines, you get all data, right? Most of the time, you're able to get all the data. When it's markets, data is usually incomplete. You need to take decisions, right? You need to decide. Somebody has given you a request for proposal and said, submit this proposal in 1 month. This is the scope of work. You need to set up so-and-so utility. Give me your quotation for this. There's no way you'll get all your data before that. You need to go partially with your gut, right? While it's true for engineering also to some extent, a lot more on this side, right? In terms of the areas of the brain, so all of you are aware that the left brain is responsible for analytical kind of activities and the right brain for creative kind of activities, right? So engineering is a lot of left brain because a lot of deep analysis and analysis and maths and physics of engineering and so on, plus a little bit of right brain. So I would say core left plus right. Of course, now with design and so on taking off, a lot of these elements are also coming in. If you look at management, a lot of right brain activities, like I said, trying to be creative, trying to come out with something that, come out with advertisements, come out with marketing strategy, come out with how to package a product, how to, whatever, lot of creativity that you need to display, plus a lot of analysis as well. I mean, you look at data, you analyze, come out with insights, that as well. And particularly now with the coming in of big data, I mean, there's a lot more of left brain activity which is also going to happen in management. So, I mean, the possibilities of big data are immense, right? So, if you look at how, in terms of what a person is interested in, if somebody is interested in nerdy stuff in kind of, goes deep into technology and so on, probably he's cut out to be a good engineer. Being a manager, you have to be interested in people, culture, politics. You need to know what's happening in the market. I mean, I remember during the time I was attending some IIM interviews, I remember there was somebody who had come with me for an interview, and the interviewer from the IIM asked him about something in politics. So he said, who is the Minister of Aviation or something like that. And this guy said, sir, I'm not interested in politics, I'm an apolitical guy. So Prof said, I'm sorry, if you need to come into management, you need to know politics, you need to know what's happening here. Let me tell you a story. There was a cigarette brand which launched a product called Horizon, okay? And this product became a big failure in rural North India. Now, with your knowledge of Indian culture and so on, can you tell me why? Can you guess why it became such a big failure? Well, the answer is that in rural North India, Horizon was perceived as something like Harijan. It's a very sad story. It reflects very badly on, the prevalence of caste system, etc. But then that's the truth. I mean, that's how the market is, right? So you need to know local culture. You need to know what's happening in politics, which party has what kind of policies in mind, who is supporting FDI in retail, who is not supporting FDI in retail. If you're not interested in that, sorry, I mean, you can't, management is not the game for you. Maybe as an engineer, you don't need to know this to that extent. I mean, you're working with machines, you're designing something, okay, fine. So to some extent, that's a difference as well, okay. In terms of how you work on logic and convincing people, here again, I had mentioned this before, that as an engineer, you can come out with logic, design, logic works, right? But if you are in management, if you are in business development, if you have to market it, etc., it has to convince people. You have to be able to convince people about your solutions as well, right? And looking at how fungible is your expertise, engineers are very specialized. I mean, I've put that above as well. They're very specialized. So if you are working in, let us say, research in soaps and detergents, probably that's what you'll be doing for all your life. As a manager, your skills are a lot more fungible. I know people who have worked in marketing soaps and detergents for Hindustan Lever moving to telecom or moving somewhere else. So the set of skills that you have is a lot more fungible. So I would say to some extent, being an engineer is you're sort of an area of your focus you've picked up and you're studying that, but the market for that could go up and down, right? So if you've studied development of photo film or something like that, today that technology is obsolete, right? So you need to keep reinventing yourself even as an engineer and be able to change your expertise as well. Ultimately, I mean, there was this young IIT alumnus, probably passed out from IIT Delhi 1 or 2 years back, who asked me that, do you think I should do an MBA? So I asked him a very simple question. I said, did you study your engineering well? So he said, no, I mean, IIT, I just, sort of wrote exams, I just cleared them, I studied 2 days before my exams. I didn't really study my engineering very well. Then I said, well, you need something as a core. If you have very strong core engineering skills, you might not need to do an MBA, right? For instance, I've worked with Flipkart, right? So the founders of Flipkart are engineers from IIT Delhi, right? Computer science engineers, very strong in technology. So their differentiator in the way they are running their business and so on, very, very strong engineering and technology. So on top of that, you can add a management flavor about, it's not very difficult. I mean, you learn something about finance, you learn something about marketing, not very difficult. You can add something on top of it. But if you haven't done your core engineering very seriously, very well, then I think you should look at doing at least management in a core, very serious way, right? Okay. Now, academics versus corporate versus entrepreneurship, because this is again, I think all of us here would be going into one of these. Now, academics, I'm not qualified to say anything about it because, academics is not my forte and it's not an area that I'm qualified to talk about, so I'll leave that. But in terms of industry, corporate, and how that differs from entrepreneurship, industries, if you're working in a corporate, safe and secure, you have a good support system, you have somebody to take care of your antivirus, somebody to book your tickets, etc. So you have a good support system, right? Having a good boss and a good corporate culture, absolutely key. There is a research which says that 50% of people who leave their jobs leave because of the boss. This is a research which was done some time back, right? So this is absolutely key if you're working in a corporate, right? And you need to figure out that in any industry, where really are the premiums in the value chain. So for instance, I was working with a client who wanted to procure an entire turnkey IT system. So he wanted to have servers, he wanted to have PCs, he wanted to have an ERP system, he wanted to have implementation of that, he wanted to have processors, everything in a one turnkey contract. So what he said was that he said, I really don't care about which processor you use, which kind of hardware you use, etc. As long as I define performance levels and you deliver that to me, it's okay. I mean, I'm brand agnostic, right? But when it comes to the applications which my people use, my employees use these applications, there I'm very sensitive to the brand, the functionalities, what is available in it, and so on. So in that whole IT value chain, that is one area where there is a lot of premium towards the brand, right? So typically in industries, if you are in that part of the value chain where there is a high premium to the brand, definitely your life is a lot more peaceful. The pressure for top lines, bottom lines is a lot easier, right? Okay, and in corporates and industries, you're always competing as well as cooperating with very smart people, people like you. So if you join a corporate, you'll have other IITians, other IIM grads, etc., with whom you are competing and cooperating, right? In entrepreneurship, you're chartering your own journey, right? You're chartering your own path. Now, one key thing that I would like to say for everybody considering entrepreneurship is one sort of misconception that people have is that it's all about the idea, right? Having a great idea, I become an entrepreneur. And many people, don't share their ideas. Even if they approach investors, they're very reluctant to reveal details of their ideas because, they're scared of IP theft and whatever, all those things. But actually, if you look at companies which have really succeeded, startup companies, it's very rarely just the idea. It is actually the execution. I mean, was Google the first search engine? It wasn't. Was Facebook the first social media? It wasn't. It wasn't that they came up first with the idea. It's just that they executed it so well, right? They came out with such tremendous offerings in whatever areas that they chose, right? Being at the right place at the right time, like I said, every industry has a certain cycle of evolution. There is that create, preserve, destroy kind of thing happening all the time. So choosing the right industries, the right areas within that, things where there are game-changing technologies, etc. Right? So that becomes very important. Fortune favors the prepared mind. This is a famous statement, of course, and Vinod Khosla keeps citing this, that fortune favors the prepared mind. If you look at Bill Gates or any other entrepreneur and feel that well, he was just at the right place at the right time, I mean, don't discredit him for that. I mean, he was there and he was prepared for it. Right? As I said, the ken of knowledge that you proactively acquire, that's what prepares you for it. Right? Entrepreneurship, you need to eat, sleep, drink your business, right? And even dream about your business, right? It needs to come to you in your dreams. That's when you're really driving your business, and that's how it needs to be, right? And of course, the excitement of doing your own things, being your own boss. But another point here is that many people who go into entrepreneurship, I mean, it sort of becomes a one-way street that they find it difficult to come back to a corporate culture after that. Once you're used to being your own boss, doing things your own way, it sort of becomes a one-way kind of thing. Okay, now this is my last slide. Some of the myths that prevail in IIT, at least in my time, they used to prevail. I don't know about whether they're prevailing now, which I think through my experience now, I've been able to realize that they're just myths. Everybody tries to give this impression and create this image that I'm a freak out. I'm freaking out all the time. I don't study at all, but at the same time, I crack my academics. Right? Everybody tries to portray that I'm really intelligent. I don't work hard, but yet I do well. Right? I don't believe that. It's all nonsense. Either somebody is fibbing or he is being lucky. That's it. There's nothing inglorious about hard work. I mean, it's very uncool in IIT to be working hard, but that's not right. Hard work is great. Right? If you aren't inherently very intelligent and talented, and yet you're able to surmount things and you're able to work hard and achieve something, I think that's a greater achievement than somebody who is intelligent and talented and doing well. I think that's a greater achievement. The second thing is that, generally this kind of image that memorizing is a very sissy thing to do. I mean, maths is cool. I don't like to memorize things. I want to derive everything from first principles. I want to start with this and then I want to do, mathematical derivations of things. I don't want to do rote learning, right? Now, please understand that there's a big difference between rote learning and memorizing. Rote learning means memorizing something without understanding it, right? You just commit something to your memory without understanding anything about it. That's rote learning. Memorizing actually is understanding and remembering, right? So if you look at, there's always been this kind of fear that computers will become smarter than us, robots will be created, will be better than human beings, whatever, all those things. But the point where a lot of people across the world started believing that yes, now computers might have overtaken humans in terms of their intelligence was in 97 when Garry Kasparov lost to Big Blue, IBM's supercomputer, to Deep Blue, sorry. So that was the turning point when they felt that probably machine intelligence surpassing human intelligence, and that was based on a game of chess. And do you know how much memory a game of chess requires? That's how cool memory is. It's not